She was 6 months pregnant, hiding from one of the most dangerous men on the East Coast, the father of her baby. She had changed her phone number, deleted every trace of her existence, and was working 2 jobs just to survive. But when she collapsed, crying on the bathroom floor of the office building she cleaned at night, the one man she was running from kicked down the door. He looked at her tear-streaked face. Then his eyes dropped to her belly. And in that moment, everything she had built to protect herself and her unborn child shattered. What happened next will make you question everything you think you know about love, danger, and the impossible choices women are forced to make. Stay until the end, because the truth she discovers about this man is nothing like what the headlines said. Rain beat against the glass of the Manhattan skyscraper. I was on my second job of the day, working as a janitor. Every sound seemed to echo the exhaustion settled deep in my bones. I was 23 years old, and my life was a routine built for survival. I spent my mornings as a secretary in a downtown law firm and my nights cleaning office buildings. My hands were cracked from chemicals and my feet were always in pain. I kept telling myself this was all temporary. I believed that earning my business degree would change everything. The tiny apartment in Queens, the smell of mildew, the neighbor's late-night bass playing. It would all just be a bad memory. But my life had already changed 6 months earlier. It changed in a way that left me terrified, running from a secret I could no longer keep. It all began with a call from my supervisor. I sometimes worked for his catering company on weekends. He needed someone for a last-minute event at the Celestial Hotel. It was the kind of place with doormen in white gloves, where one night cost more than I earned in 3 months. I almost refused. The exhaustion from my last double shift still ached in my feet. But the job paid 3 times my normal rate, and my rent had just gone up. So I found my black dress and white apron, tied my dark blonde hair in a bun, and went to the service entrance. 20 other servers stood there. They all looked as tired and desperate as I was. The ballroom itself felt almost offensively rich. The crystal chandeliers were worth more than my student loans. The marble floors were so clean, I could see my own tired face. All the guests wore designer clothes and jewels that could probably pay off a small country's debt. I carried trays of champagne through the crowd, feeling completely invisible. That is how the wealthy always see service workers. But then I felt a strange sensation. Someone was watching me. I turned my head and saw him for the first time. He was near the massive windows that overlooked the city. He was incredibly tall, with a powerful presence. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored and likely cost more than my used car. He had dark hair, styled back in that perfect way European men seem to achieve. From across the room, I saw the sharp line of his jaw and the intensity in his eyes. People around him kept a subtle distance, respecting an unspoken boundary of power. His name was Adrian Caruso. I did not know it then, but I would learn it soon. I would learn everything that made him so captivating and so dangerous. When our eyes met, he did not look away. He did not pretend to be uninterested like most people would. Instead, he gave a small lift of his glass. The corner of his mouth turned up in something that was not quite a smile. It was a gesture that said more than words. My heart began to pound, but not from the work. I told myself to break his gaze, to remember my job. I was not there to get involved with men who wore Rolex watches and radiated a sense of danger. But he found me later anyway. I was taking a break in an empty service hall, resting my feet. He appeared so silently that I only noticed him when he spoke. His voice was low, with an accent that hinted at an Italian background and a very expensive education. We spoke for what seemed like forever, but it was probably just 20 minutes. We talked about art and the hypocrisy of the rich. I told him about my dream to finish school and open my own business. He listened with an intensity that made me feel like the only person in the world. He brushed his fingers against my hand, and a jolt of electricity went through me. I should have left right then. I should have seen the red flags. Other guests treated him with a nervous respect that was closer to fear. 3 men in dark suits watched him from a distance. They were clearly his bodyguards. but I was 23 and so tired of being unseen. He asked if I wanted to see the rooftop garden after my shift. Before I could think, I heard myself say yes. The rooftop was deserted. The city lights glittered below us like a blanket of fallen stars. He kissed me there, against the glass barrier, as the wind blew around us. In that moment, I forgot every rational thought I ever had. We went back to his suite. It was no surprise that he had one. He probably had many. The night that followed was like something from a movie, the kind of romance novel you feel embarrassed to read in public. He was passionate and gentle, focused completely on me in a way I had never known. For just a few hours, I let myself believe in fairy tales. I thought a girl like me could be wanted by a man who looked like he belonged on a magazine cover. But morning always brings reality. While he was still asleep, I picked up my phone. I made the mistake of searching his name online. The search results turned my blood to ice. There were articles about organized crime. There were reports on investigations into money laundering and racketeering. I saw photos of him leaving a courthouse, surrounded by lawyers famous for getting guilty men set free. Adrian Caruso was not just a rich, powerful man. He was the head of one of the most dangerous crime families on the East Coast. His businesses ranged from legal real estate to other ventures I did not want to imagine. I got dressed in total silence. My hands were shaking so much I could barely do the buttons on my shirt. I left without waking him up. He had left a business card with his private number on the table. I threw it away. I deleted the hotel from my phone's map history. On the subway ride home, I tried to convince myself it was a single mistake, a brief failure of judgment I would never make again. I kept telling myself that men like Adrian Caruso do not chase after girls like me. He surely had many women far more beautiful and worldly than I was. I was certain I would never see him again. It was for the best. 2 weeks later, I was in the bathroom of a drugstore, holding a pregnancy test. When the two lines appeared, I just sat there for 20 minutes, trying to figure out how to breathe again. A second test showed the same result. A third one confirmed it. I made an appointment at a clinic in Brooklyn. I used a fake name and paid with cash. The doctor told me what I already knew. I was about 6 weeks pregnant. The baby was healthy. And now I had to make a choice that would change my entire life. I thought about ending the pregnancy. I am not ashamed to say it. I seriously considered it. I booked appointments that I never went to. I read about all my options until my eyes burned from staring at the screen. But each time I came close to deciding, something held me back. It was not religion or morals. It was not pressure from anyone else. It was a deeper feeling that I could not explain. Maybe it was because I grew up without a father. I knew how much that absence could hurt. Maybe it was just a stubborn belief that I could do this alone, that I could be the kind of mother I never had. Or maybe it was just a terrifying kind of hope that things would somehow be okay. But I knew one thing for sure. I could never tell Adrian. He was a gangster. He was a man who solved his problems with threats and violence. He lived in a world with rules I did not understand. What would he do if he found out? Would he accuse me of trying to trap him? Would he see our child as a weakness, a target for his enemies? Would he try to take my baby from me? Or would he make us both disappear? I had no way of knowing how a man like him would react, and I was not brave enough to find out. So I chose to hide. I found a sublet in Washington Heights through a friend of a friend and moved immediately, paying 3 months of rent in cash. I got a new phone number. I deleted every one of my social media profiles. I told anyone who asked that I was dealing with a private family matter. At my jobs, I began wearing looser clothes. I bought expensive compression wraps to hide my stomach. I invented a story about a back injury to explain why I moved so slowly and could not lift anything heavy. In my second month, morning sickness was severe. I claimed it was food poisoning or bad migraines, but my body kept changing in ways I could no longer conceal. I knew my time was running out. To keep my secret safe, I stopped attending work functions and declined invitations for lunch. I built a reputation for being standoffish and intensely private. The deceptions piled up, becoming more intricate and draining every week. By my 5th month, hiding the truth felt like a second full-time job, demanding more of my energy than my actual work. Each day began with the same anxious ritual in front of the mirror. I would stand sideways, checking for any new changes to my body, planning which loose sweater and high-waisted pants might conceal the growing curve of my stomach. My wardrobe was now full of oversized blazers from second-hand shops, flowing tops I wore in layers, and scarves I arranged to draw attention away from my middle. My colleagues must have thought I had a strange new sense of style or was hiding that I had put on weight, but no one ever asked. The physical demands were constant and harsh. My secretarial role meant sitting at a desk for 8 hours a day. I learned to angle my chair to hide my profile and timed my trips to the restroom for when the office was quiet. I ate lunch by myself at my desk, while others socialized in the break room. The evening cleaning shift was harder. I had to bend, lift, and reach, always trying to shield the baby inside me. I had to leave my catering job completely after I almost fainted during a wedding. I invented a family emergency to explain my sudden departure. The lack of money became a suffocating weight that stole my sleep. Prenatal appointments were expensive, even at the low-cost clinic I found in the Bronx. I needed vitamins, larger clothes every few weeks, and money for a new apartment security deposit. I even bought a disposable phone just in case. The costs grew faster than my income. I took on freelance transcription jobs, typing until my fingers ached and my eyes stung late into the night. I listened to hours of legal and medical recordings, trying to ignore my own problems. I sold anything that had value: my laptop, my jewelry, and even my college textbooks. I stopped attending my classes, telling myself I would go back after the baby was born. It was a lie I told myself just to get through the day. The isolation felt worse than the physical pain or the money worries. I had never been a social butterfly, but I used to have friends and coworkers who made life feel less empty. That all vanished when I decided to hide my pregnancy. I ignored text messages, refused every invitation, and made up reasons why I could not meet for coffee or a meal. My best friend from college, Sarah, called me 17 times in a single week. She finally sent a text saying she was worried and asked me to just let her know I was okay. I replied with a short message about a family issue and then blocked her number. I knew if I heard her voice, the truth would come spilling out. The only real human connection I had was with my obstetrician. Dr. Patricia Chen was a serious woman in her 50s. Her practice was for patients who needed privacy or could not afford standard medical care. During my first appointment, she asked about the father and my support system. When I gave vague answers, she just took notes in my file and continued. She talked about eating well and staying hydrated. Each month, I went to my appointment, heard the tiny heartbeat that always made me cry, and looked at the ultrasound pictures. I kept those pictures locked in a box under my bed. I always received the same advice about rest and nutrition, which I could not always follow. The baby started to feel real to me, slowly at first, and then with a sudden rush. For months, the pregnancy was just a concept, a medical issue I had to manage. But in my 4th month, I felt a tiny flutter. It was so light, I thought I had imagined it. A week later, a clear kick made me gasp during a work meeting. From then on, the baby was always with me. It was a small person who had preferences about my food, my sleep schedule, and how I sat. I began to speak to the baby inside my head during the long, lonely nights. I described my day, the things I wished I could provide, and the father they would never meet. I wondered if that choice made me selfish, or protective, or simply terrified. I tried not to think about Adrian, but he was always on my mind. I would see a man on the train with a similar frame, and my heart would pound until I realized it was not him. I had frequent dreams about him. Some were good dreams about our night together, the tenderness of his hands, and the way he looked at me. But most were nightmares where he learned the truth, and his face became cold and menacing. In the early months, I searched for him online constantly. I read every article about his businesses, his legal issues, and his family. I saw photos of him at charity events with beautiful women. He was pictured leaving restaurants with men who looked dangerous and walking out of courthouses with that same focused look I remembered. One report called him ruthless yet fair, a man who earned loyalty through a mix of fear and genuine protection. Another described a violent conflict with a rival group that left 3 men dead, with Adrian avoiding charges because of a lack of evidence. I could not reconcile these stories with the man who had listened to me talk for hours, who had touched me so gently. Which version of him was the real one? Could they both be? And what did it say about me that I still felt something other than fear when I thought of him? My paranoia grew as the pregnancy continued. I was sure someone was following me. I feared turning a corner and finding one of his men waiting for me. I changed my route home from work every day. I constantly looked over my shoulder and stayed away from places I had mentioned to him. When a black SUV parked across from my apartment for 3 days, I nearly broke down before I learned it was my neighbor's boyfriend. Every unexpected knock or unfamiliar voice in the hall made my heart race. The deception took a heavy toll on me. I had always valued honesty, but now my whole life was a lie. I had to keep track of a growing web of untruths. I lied to my landlord about needing to move. I lied to my boss about my frequent medical appointments. I lied to the few people still in my life to explain my distance. I lied to myself that I was making the right choice, not just the easiest one. The most difficult times were late at night, alone with my thoughts and the baby's movements. The weight of the future felt crushing. I would lie in my small apartment, listening to the city noises outside, and wonder what I would do when the baby came. How would I pay for childcare? How could I work and raise an infant alone? What would I tell my child about their father? Would I invent a story about a man who never was? Or would I offer a version of the truth that would only create more questions? I researched every possible solution, from adoption to government aid. I applied for housing assistance and childcare programs. I even looked into giving the baby up without naming the father, a thought that filled me with a deep sense of guilt. But nothing felt like the right answer. So I continued one day at a time, telling myself I would find a way when the moment arrived. My body was changing in ways that were both amazing and frightening. The baby was very active, especially at night, performing what felt like gymnastics routines inside me. I had gained weight, my face was fuller, and my ankles swelled up by the end of each day. My back was in constant agony. Every step felt like my hips would split open. I even developed a waddle that I tried so hard to hide. The physical pain was a non-stop reminder of the choices that led me here, a kind of punishment I felt I deserved. The end came on a Tuesday in late October, 5 months and 2 weeks into my pregnancy. The evening started like any other. I finished my shift as a secretary at the law firm, bought a sad sandwich for dinner, and went to my cleaning job. I had worked at the corporate building in Midtown for almost a year. The building was home to financial firms and tech startups. I was in charge of the 12th through the 15th floors. It meant 4 hours of emptying trash cans, vacuuming, and cleaning bathrooms for executives who never saw me. That night, I felt wrong the moment I clocked in. The baby had been kicking my ribs all day, making it hard to take a full breath. A headache I got on the train was getting worse with every hour. But I kept working. I could not afford to miss a shift, not when I was so behind on saving money for the baby. I began on the 15th floor, moving through the empty offices. I tried not to think about my aching back or how much I needed to just sit down. Around 8:30, my landlord called. I almost ignored it because I knew it was bad news, but I answered anyway. His voice was apologetic but firm. The building was sold. The new owners were renovating. Everyone had to be out by the end of the month. He said he understood it was difficult. He insisted his hands were tied. He promised to return my security deposit, but I had to find a new place to live right away. The call lasted maybe 5 minutes. When I hung up, my hands were shaking too much to hold the phone. I stood in the empty hallway, staring at the floor, trying to understand what this meant. I had enough money saved for 1 more month of rent, maybe 2 if I ate less. But finding an apartment in New York City was impossible. No one would rent to a pregnant single woman with no good references or family to help. I thought about my baby. I worried we would end up on the street. I wondered if this was the universe telling me I had made a terrible mistake. The panic felt like a physical blow. It squeezed my chest and made my vision tunnel. I stumbled into the nearest bathroom. My legs collapsed, and I slid down the wall to the floor. For the first time since learning I was pregnant, I broke completely. The sobs were huge and violent, shaking my entire body and making my throat raw. I wrapped my arms around my belly, feeling the baby move inside me. I cried for everything I had lost and everything I was terrified to lose. I have no idea how long I sat on that cold tile, folded over my own stomach in that empty bathroom. It could have been 5 minutes, or it could have been 30. I only knew that I eventually heard footsteps in the hall. They were heavy and deliberate, and they stopped right outside the door. I tried to silence my sobs and pull myself together, but I could not. The handle turned, even though I had locked it. Then the entire door frame shook as someone kicked it open in a single powerful motion. I looked up with tears still pouring down my face and saw him. Adrian Caruso stood in the doorway. He looked like something from my worst nightmare and my most secret dream. He wore a 3-piece navy suit that cost more than I made in 6 months. His dark hair was slicked back perfectly. A diamond watch on his wrist caught the harsh fluorescent light. We just stared at each other. I watched his face change from worried to shocked to something I could not name, as his gaze dropped from my tear-streaked face to my arms wrapped around my very pregnant belly. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with an emotion I had never heard from him. Natalie. He only said my name, but the way he said it made me cry even harder. He started to move toward me, and I pressed myself back against the wall. He stopped as if I had hit him. "How long?" he asked. I could hear him struggling to keep his voice steady. "How long have you been pregnant?" I could not speak. The words were trapped behind my sobs. He crouched down slowly, keeping his distance as if I were a scared animal. Up close, I saw details I had forgotten. The tiny scar over his left eyebrow, the exact dark shade of his eyes, the way the muscle in his jaw flexed when he was trying to stay in control. "Who is the father, Natalie?" His voice was now very quiet and very dangerous. "Tell me now. Who is the father?" The question hung between us. I knew I had only seconds to make a choice that would change my life. I could lie. I could invent a boyfriend, a random man who had nothing to do with him. But looking into his eyes, seeing how close he was to breaking, I could not do it. The truth was a faint whisper. "You are." I watched the words hit him like a physical force. He rocked back on his heels. His hand flew to his mouth, his eyes wide with shock, fury, and pain. "You are telling me," he said slowly, his accent growing stronger as his control slipped, "that you have been carrying my child for?" He gestured to my stomach. "Months. And you did not think I deserved to know?" "I was scared," I whispered through my tears. "I did not know what you would do. I did not know if you would." I could not finish the thought. I could not say all the terrible things I had imagined. His face grew hard. When he spoke again, his voice was cold enough to make me shiver. "What did you think I would do, Natalie? What exactly did you imagine?" He shot to his feet, pacing the tiny room like a tiger in a cage. "Did you think I would hurt you? Force you to do something? Make you disappear?" Each question was sharper than the last, and I could hear real pain beneath his anger. "I do not know you," I said, sounding more defensive than I meant to. "We spent one night together. I only knew what I read about you online. None of it made you sound happy about an accidental baby with a woman you barely knew." He spun around to face me so fast that I flinched. "One night?" he repeated, his voice full of disbelief. "You think that was just one night to me? Do you think I have not spent the last 6 months looking for you? Wondering what I did to make you run away like I was some kind of monster? He ran a hand through his perfect hair, messing it up. I had people searching for you, Natalie. I was discreet because I did not want to scare you. But I looked. Do you know how hard you have to try to hide from someone with my resources? The new information was hard to process. You looked for me. My voice was small and unsure. Of course I looked for you, he said. Suddenly, all the anger left him, replaced by what looked like pure devastation. He slid down the opposite wall and put his head in his hands. That night meant something to me. You meant something to me. And then you were gone. And I thought... He stopped and looked at me with eyes full of pain. I thought I had imagined the connection. I thought I had misread everything. I thought I was just another rich man who fooled himself into thinking a beautiful woman wanted him for something other than his money. His honesty made my own chest ache. It was not like that, I said quietly. That night it was real. All of it was real. That is why I ran. It scared me how much I felt, how fast it all happened. And then I learned who you really were. And I panicked. He was silent for a long moment, watching my face as if trying to read my mind. So instead of talking to me, instead of giving me a chance, you decided to hide my child from me for months. You chose to struggle alone. You chose to cry on bathroom floors. His eyes moved over my cheap, worn clothes and my exhausted face. I could see him realizing just how hard my life had been. How have you been paying for doctors? I have been managing, I said, holding on to the last piece of my pride. I have 2 jobs. I found a clinic. I have been. You have been barely surviving, he interrupted, his voice sharp. Do not lie to me, Natalie. Not anymore. Not about this. He stood up, and he was suddenly towering over me. This tall, powerful man he could probably end my life with a single phone call. And he was telling me, "You are coming with me." What? I tried to push myself off the floor, but my body refused to obey. No, I cannot just... This is not a discussion. He reached down. Before I could even protest, he had lifted me into his arms as if I weighed nothing. My pregnant belly made no difference. You are exhausted. You are distraught. And you are carrying my child. We are going somewhere safe. We can talk there, where you are not on a bathroom floor in a place you should never have been working. Not in your condition. Put me down, I said. But my voice had no strength. The truth was, I was tired. I was overwhelmed. And being held by someone who seemed to care, even if he was furious, felt better than I could admit. Adrian carried me from that bathroom, through the silent office, like I was precious. Like I could break. His arms were strong and steady, holding me even as I insisted I could walk. In the elevator, our reflection appeared in the mirrored walls. He looked every bit the powerful man he was in his expensive suit. I was in a cleaning uniform, my cheeks stained with tears, with a belly I could no longer conceal. The difference between us was almost comical. His jaw was a hard line. A muscle twitched in his cheek, a sign he was holding back a hurricane of emotion by pure will. 3 men in dark suits stood waiting in the lobby. They did not even blink when their boss carried a pregnant woman through the marble entrance. One man moved to open the door of a black SUV at the curb. Another spoke quietly into his phone in what sounded like Italian. The third scanned the street, alert like someone expecting trouble. Adrian placed me in the back seat with surprising gentleness, then slid in next to me. Seconds later, we were moving through the Manhattan traffic. The driver moved with a smooth skill that showed he had done this countless times. I stared out the window. The city lights blurred as I tried to understand what was happening. This was the exact situation I had feared for months. Being found, being confronted, being dragged into Adrian's world, whether I wanted it or not. But it was not happening the way I imagined. He was not threatening me. He was not trying to intimidate me. He just sat beside me, his gaze occasionally dropping to my stomach with an expression I could not understand. He looked almost as overwhelmed as I felt. We drove to a building in Tribeca that looked incredibly expensive even from the outside. It was a converted warehouse with windows from floor to ceiling. A doorman nodded at Adrian with the respect you give a building's owner, which he probably was. He led me to a penthouse apartment that was exactly what I would have pictured. It was modern and spacious. The art on the walls probably cost more than most houses. The city views would have been spectacular if I had been able to appreciate them. He guided me to a leather couch so soft I almost sank into it. Then he went into what I guessed was the kitchen. I heard cabinets open and water running. He returned with a glass and handed it to me. "Drink," he said. It was not quite in order, but it was close. "You are dehydrated from crying." I took the water. He was right, and I had no energy left to argue. He sat in an armchair across from me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. This close, I could see he looked tired, too. He had shadows under his eyes that told me he had been sleeping as badly as I had. The perfect suit could not hide the tension in his shoulders or the weariness on his face. "Start at the beginning," he said at last. "Tell me everything." And so I did. I told him about the pregnancy test, the panic, the impossible choices. I told him about moving, changing my number, and quitting school. I told him about going to clinic appointments all alone, about the ultrasound pictures I kept in a hidden box, about whispering to the baby late at night. I told him about selling my things to buy prenatal vitamins, about the lies I told everyone, and about the crushing loneliness of it all. I told him about the phone call tonight, about losing my home, and the feeling that my world was collapsing. He listened without a single interruption. His expression grew darker with every word I spoke. When I was finally done, he was silent for a long time. His hands were clasped so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "You should have come to me," he said. His voice was rough with an emotion he was fighting to control. "The moment you knew, you should have found a way to tell me." "I was terrified of you," I said with total honesty, "of who you are, what you do, what you might do to me or to the baby. Every article I read said you were dangerous and unpredictable. I did not know if I was just a random woman you had already forgotten about." "You were never random," he cut in, his eyes locked on mine. That night was the first time in years I felt like I could be someone else. Someone other than what everyone expects. "You spoke to me like I was just a man. Not a name, not a reputation, not something to fear. Do you have any idea how rare that is for me?" I shook my head, unable to speak. The raw honesty in his voice was tearing down the walls I had built for months. He stood up suddenly and started pacing the expensive floor. "I understand your fear. I know what people say about me, and most of it is true. I have done things that would horrify you. I have made choices that haunt me. I built a life in a world where violence is a tool and loyalty is bought with fear." He stopped and turned to me. "But I would never hurt you, and I would never hurt a child, especially my own." "How was I supposed to know that?" I asked, my own voice filled with desperation. "You are a stranger who happens to be the father of my baby. I did not know what you would do, so I could not take that risk." His expression changed, becoming almost vulnerable. "My father," he said quietly, "was a violent man. He used his fists on my mother all the time, and on his children sometimes. I watched her make excuses for black eyes and broken ribs. I watched her fade away. When she got sick with a cancer that might have been treatable, he barely visited her in the hospital. She died when I was 15. I swore on her grave I would never be like him. I swore that if I ever had a family, I would protect them with everything I had." I felt tears welling up again, but for a different reason now. "I am sorry," I whispered. "I did not know." "Of course you did not," he said, and his voice softened. "We had one night, Natalie. One perfect night that I have replayed in my mind 1,000 times, trying to understand why you ran away. But that is in the past. The only thing that matters is what we do now. He sat down again. He looked at me with an intensity that stole my breath. I want to be involved, not just with money, though of course I will handle all of that immediately. I want to be part of this pregnancy. I want to be part of our child's life. He paused, as if struggling for the words. I want us to try, not just because you are pregnant, but because I have not been able to stop thinking about you since that night. When I heard you crying and recognized your voice, my first thought was not about the baby or the secret. It was that I had finally found you, and I was never going to let you disappear again. My heart was beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. Adrian, I do not know if I can live in your world. The things you do, the danger. I will change, he said instantly. Not who I am at my core, but I will change the parts that put you in danger. I have already been thinking about stepping back from some things, giving more control to people I trust. I have resources you cannot even imagine. Security, protection. I can make sure you and the baby are safe from any threat. That is not normal, I said, almost laughing. Normal people do not need security teams and protection. We stopped being normal the moment you became pregnant with the heir to the Caruso family, he said bluntly. Like it or not, this child makes you both targets. My enemies will see you as a weakness they can use against me. The only way to keep you safe is to bring you under my protection completely, to make it clear to everyone that touching you means starting a war with me. The weight of his words settled on me. I was so focused on hiding from Adrian that I never thought about other dangers, threats from people I did not even know existed. This is crazy, I said. My life was supposed to be simple. I was going to finish college, maybe open a small business, and have a normal family in a normal apartment. He spoke quietly, telling me I still could, just with paid security in the background and a much better apartment. He moved his hand toward me slowly, giving me a chance to retreat. When I stayed still, he rested his palm on my stomach. The baby kicked right away, as if answering his touch. I saw his expression change to pure wonder. The days that followed were a confusing rush of events I could barely keep up with. Adrian did not ask for my opinion. He simply told me the decisions he had already made. A part of me hated his complete control, but I was too tired to argue. In just one day, he moved my things from my little place in Washington Heights. Everything went to a secure building on the Upper East Side, to what he called his safe house. It was a 3-bedroom unit with constant security. The kitchen was larger than my old apartment. The windows faced Central Park, with a view that cost more a month than I earned in a year. He did not live with me. At first, this confused me, but then I understood. He was giving me space so I would not feel more overwhelmed. Still, he was always there. He brought food from expensive restaurants I only knew from magazines. He had vitamins sent from a special pharmacy. He chose books about babies and pregnancy after hours of searching. He came to every one of my doctor visits. In the room, his intense focus made Dr. Chen look at him strangely, but she never asked why. His hand found mine when we heard the baby's heartbeat. His face was impossible to read as he looked at the ultrasound pictures of our healthy, growing child. This new life was jarring. It made me uncomfortable in ways I did not expect. I suddenly had everything I had needed for months. Good food, enough sleep, and medical care were no longer a struggle, but taking it all felt like I had surrendered my independence. Adrian demanded I quit my 2 jobs right away. I argued that I had to work, that I could not take his charity. He looked at me like I was being foolish. He said carrying his child was my job now. He told me I should have been resting, not cleaning buildings when I was 5 months pregnant. He put money in a new bank account under my name. The number on the statement stole my breath. I tried to set rules about his money, but he stopped me. His tone left no room for debate. He said I was carrying his heir, and his voice made it clear this could not be changed. He told me everything I needed, everything that made this easier, was his duty. He called it his privilege, not charity. He said I should not insult us both by pretending I did not need his help. But it was more than just the money or the comfort. The most confusing part was Adrian himself. He was genuinely trying to be different. He was still intense and powerful. He was a man used to getting what he wanted. But around me, he was careful, as if he was always holding himself back. He fought his own instincts to avoid scaring me. He always asked before he touched my belly, though I could see he longed to feel the baby move. When I spoke about my worries, he listened instead of just trying to solve them. He brought me books, music, and endless meals, learning what I liked with a focus that was almost too much. We talked more than I ever thought we would. He told me about his childhood, about the pressure and violence that made him who he was. He spoke of the mother he loved and the father he feared and then replaced. He was brutally honest about his work, which sometimes made me uneasy. He did not make it sound glamorous or pretend it was noble, but he never apologized for the things he did to survive and gain power in his world. Then he started to share his plan for a different future. He wanted to step away from the most dangerous parts of his work. He wanted to build legitimate companies that would not put us in danger. One evening, he admitted he had been thinking about it for a long time. I was on the couch with my swollen feet up. He told me the violence and the constant threats were exhausting. He said it could not last forever. He had loyal men who could run things, who had earned more power. He explained he could oversee everything without getting his hands dirty, without risking death or prison. I asked him if he could truly leave that life behind. He explained it was not about leaving completely. He would always have his influence and connections. But he could be a man who gives orders from afar, not one who fights every battle himself. He said our child deserved a father who was present, not one who was always expecting an attack. I wanted to trust him, but I knew that leaving such a world was never simple. Enemies do not just forget. I finally asked the question that had been haunting me. What about the people who see our baby as a weapon against you? I reminded him that he said they would target us. His face grew hard. He said that threat would not go away completely. That is why I would always have security. It is why the baby would be protected from birth. It is why he was destroying the rivals who were the biggest danger. He leaned toward me, his gaze sharp. I know this is not the life you chose, Natalie, but I will protect you both. That is not a boast. It is a promise I will back up with everything I have. His confidence should have comforted me. Instead, it only showed me how lost I was. I thought of the person I was just 6 months ago, a girl planning a simple, quiet life. That girl was a stranger to me now, a naive person who did not know how fast a life could shatter. I'm afraid, I whispered, afraid of this world and what it means for our child. He told me I was already surviving it. He said I had been doing it all alone for months. You are stronger than you know, Natalie. You just have to let me help carry this burden. In the weeks that followed, I started to hope this could actually work. His daily presence was constant, and it slowly broke down my walls. He learned which foods made me sick and brought different options. When he saw I was tired, he made me rest, sometimes leading me to the bedroom himself. He was always asking about the baby. He wanted to discuss names and the nursery with a real excitement that did not feel forced. But there were always reminders of his other life. I would hear him on the phone speaking fast Italian. His voice would turn to ice as he gave orders that made people obey without question. One night he came home with bruised knuckles and a cut on his face, calling it just business. He refused to say more. Then there were the silent guards, who were always there when I went outside. They watched everything, always expecting danger. According to Dr. Chen, the pregnancy was fine. The baby was active and growing perfectly. But my blood pressure was a little high from stress, and she told me to watch it. Finally, after Adrian kept asking, I agreed to find out the sex of our baby at the next appointment. He must have asked me 15 times if it was a boy. He was certain of it, always talking about all the things he would teach his son, how he would shield him. He wanted to give him the childhood he never had. The tenderness in his voice during those moments caused a painful knot in my chest, a mix of feelings I could not yet define. We never spoke about what our relationship was. We had not put a label on what we were, other than two people expecting a child. He never tried to kiss me, and his touch never went beyond the careful, almost sacred way he would place his hands on my stomach to feel the baby kick. I could not tell if he was giving me room to adapt, or if he just no longer saw me in that way. I was too scared to ask, unsure of which answer I truly wanted. All of this changed on a freezing November night. I was 6 months along, and I had started to believe we had found a delicate balance that might actually last. Adrian had left that afternoon for a meeting he called important, something with his associates. He promised he would return for dinner and asked what I was in the mood to eat. I was in the living room reading, speaking softly to the baby about anything that came to mind. Then I heard yelling from the hall outside our apartment, followed by the unmistakable sound of gunshots. A deep chill ran through my entire body. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone to call Adrian, but the call went directly to his voicemail. The security guard assigned to my door suddenly rushed in. Her name was Maria, a woman who had been completely professional in the weeks I had known her. "We have to get you out of here now," she said, her voice strained but steady. "There has been a security failure in the building." She said the protocol required moving me to the safe room without delay. I have almost no memory of the moments that followed. I remember Maria practically carrying me across the apartment to what I had always thought was a simple closet. Instead, it was a fortified panic room, complete with its own air supply and communications gear. She was shouting orders into her radio as she locked the heavy door, sealing us inside. I slid to the floor, my arms wrapped around my stomach to protect the baby. I listened to muffled noises from outside. It could have been more gunfire, or it could have been my imagination. The baby was kicking wildly, reacting to my racing heart and the stress flooding my system. I tried to breathe deeply, to stay calm like they advised in the online birthing classes. But the terror made it nearly impossible. It felt like hours passed, but it was likely only 40 minutes before the door opened again. Adrian stood there, his face a mask of pure fury and fear. There was blood on his shirt. I could not tell if it was his or someone else's. His hair, normally styled with perfect care, was a complete mess. He crossed the room in 2 long steps and pulled me up from the floor. He held me so tightly I could hardly breathe. His hands were shaking as they moved over me, searching for any sign of injury. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice harsh and almost unrecognizable. "Did they touch you? Is the baby all right?" "We are fine," I managed to say, but I was trembling so badly the words barely came out. "What was that? What just happened?" His face became terrifyingly grim. "Rivals," he answered curtly. "The Moretti family. They tried to send a message by coming after you. They never got close. Maria and her team did their job, but the fact that they tried is enough." He continued to hold me, and I could feel the rage vibrating through him. "I am finishing this tonight. They started a war, and they will get one. But it will not be the war they were expecting." "Adrian, do not!" I started to object, but he silenced me with a look that was entirely predatory. There was nothing gentle left in his eyes. "This is not a negotiation," he said, his voice like cold steel. "They came after my child. They came after my family. In our world, there are boundaries you do not cross, and they just crossed the most important one. I offered them opportunities to retreat, to respect the lines I drew, and they ignored them. So now, I will answer in the only language men like that can comprehend." I knew there was no point in arguing with him, not while he was like this. And if I am being honest, a part of me did not want to stop him. They had tried to hurt me, to hurt our baby, and a primal piece of my soul I had never known existed wanted them to suffer for it. "What will you do?" I asked him in a low voice. "What I should have done months ago," he replied. "I will eliminate the threat. I will remove the people who command the Moretti organization. I will take apart their entire network. I will make it understood to every other family in this city that you are never to be touched." He loosened his grip slightly to cup my face with his hands. "I need you to have faith in me. Can you do that?" I gave a small nod, though I was not fully sure what I was consenting to. He kissed my forehead, a soft gesture that was so different from the violence I felt simmering inside him. Then he began giving Maria detailed commands about new security measures and emergency plans, things I could barely follow. He promised he would be back as soon as he could. He told me to remain in the apartment with the new security team, and that after tonight, everything would change. Then he was gone. I was alone with my terror, my racing mind, and a baby that would not stop kicking. Maria brought me food and urged me to rest, but I could not do either. I walked back and forth through the apartment for what felt like forever, my mind filled with the worst possible outcomes. I kept wondering what eliminating the threat really meant. I was terrified Adrian would not return, or that if he did, he would be a different man. The baby grew more agitated as the night continued, feeding off my anxiety in a way that made me feel both guilty and powerless. It was nearly sunrise when Adrian came back. He looked completely exhausted and grim, but he was not hurt. He found me in the nursery we were slowly creating, sitting in the rocking chair, staring at the empty crib. He said nothing at first. He just pulled me to my feet and held me. Even through his weariness, I could feel he was still incredibly tense. "Is it finished?" I asked, my voice muffled against his chest. "It is finished," he confirmed. "The Moretti leadership has been removed. Their businesses are broken apart. Their territory is being divided. The other families have been notified that you and the baby are under my sole protection. Anyone who makes a threat against you will receive the same punishment. You are safe now, Natalie. I swear to you that you are safe." I wanted to ask him for the details. I wanted to know what he did, who had died, and if I should feel horrified or thankful. Maybe I should have felt both. But when I looked at his face and saw the burden of what had happened in the last few hours, I could not bring myself to ask. I simply nodded and let him guide me to our bed. He held me until I finally fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. The weeks that followed were strange and filled with tension. That night had changed Adrian. He was harder in some ways, but he was also more focused on becoming the father and partner he had promised he would be. He fast-tracked his plans to remove himself from daily operations. He promoted trusted men to manage his affairs and began spending much more time with me. He was present for every doctor's visit, every new development, every moment of pain or anxiety. He studied pregnancy books with a level of concentration that would have been funny if it were not so sincere. He asked Dr. Chen so many questions that she began scheduling longer appointments for us. He devoted himself to preparing for fatherhood with the same intensity he must have once used to build his criminal enterprise. We still had not defined our relationship, but the attack had altered something between us. We were closer now, bonded by the real danger we had survived. The baby was the connection between us, stronger than any words we could say. He still did not seek any physical intimacy with me, other than holding me for comfort or placing his hands on my belly to feel our baby move. But the way he looked at me now held a tenderness that made my heart beat faster for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. My labor started 3 weeks early. It was a snowy afternoon in January, and Adrian was meeting with his lawyers to transfer business assets. My water broke suddenly while I was trying to organize the nursery, and our world erupted into controlled chaos. Maria called for backup. Adrian was there in minutes, looking completely terrified even as he tried to act calm. The drive to the hospital was a blur, feeling both dangerously fast and agonizingly slow. Then came the hours of labor, the most painful and meaningful experience of my life. Adrian was by my side through it all, holding my hand with every single contraction. He whispered words of support in both English and Italian, watching me as if I were creating a miracle. The assault happened during the final stage of my labor. I was so consumed by pain that I barely understood what was happening. I heard yelling and saw Adrian produce a gun from nowhere. I watched him stand between me and the door, his expression promising a swift death to anyone who dared to enter. Maria and the security team immediately secured the delivery room, while hospital security handled the attackers. It was a final desperate move by what was left of the Moretti associates. The entire event was over in minutes. The threat stopped long before it reached us. But that moment solidified a hard truth. Our child was being born into a violent world, whether I accepted it or not. The only way to keep them safe was to embrace Adrian's world completely. And then, after all the pain and fear and effort, our son was born. Our son was born. Adrian's hands shook just a little as he cut the umbilical cord. When the doctor placed our baby into his arms, I watched this dangerous man break down. Weeks ago, he had killed people. Now he was crying while holding our son. He whispered promises in Italian that I felt deep inside me, even though I did not understand the words. He looked at me with an emotion so raw that I began crying too. "I am going to protect you," he said. I knew he meant both of us, both of you. Whatever it takes, however I need to change, I will do it. You are my family now, Natalie, the only thing that matters. I reached up and touched his face. This man terrified me, yet he also gave me comfort. The words that had been building for weeks finally escaped. I love you. I do not know when it happened, or if this is smart, or if I am making a terrible mistake. But I love you. His face changed. It was a mix of wonder, relief, and pure determination. I fell in love with you that first night, he confessed, and I have been falling harder ever since. I know my world is violent and dangerous. It is not what you wanted, but I swear I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret giving me this chance. Then he kissed me. Our son was between us. The sounds of security teams were outside the door. We knew our life would never be normal or easy, but I looked at our baby, this tiny, perfect person we made. I realized that maybe normal was not so important after all. Maybe what we had was better. It was harder and scarier, and it took more courage than I ever knew I had. But it was more real than any fairy tale I had ever imagined. In the days that followed, Adrian kept his promises. He pulled back from his most dangerous work. He rebuilt his entire organization to make our family's safety the top priority. He started the long journey of moving into legal businesses that would not put our son in danger. It was not a total change. He was still the man he had always been. He still had power that worked in the shadows. But the change was real. It came from loving something more than he loved his own power. We moved to a house outside the city. The security was like a fortress. We created a life that balanced Adrian's business with our son's safety, and with my own slow recovery. I started taking online classes again to finish my degree at my own pace. With Adrian's full support, we built something that almost looked like a normal family. You just had to ignore the armed guards and the meetings with people who clearly lived outside the law. We named our son Marco. It was his mother's family name. He grew up knowing his parents loved him fiercely. He was completely protected. He was the heir to a complex world that we would help him understand when he was old enough. I learned that love does not always appear the way you expect. Sometimes the person who scares you the most becomes the one you cannot live without. And I learned that family, real family, is worth every risk and every fear. It is worth all the courage it takes to choose it over being safe. I had hidden the truth for months. I was terrified of what Adrienne would do. But in the end, that truth built something stronger than I could have ever imagined. Our love was not built on perfection. It was built on choosing each other every day, despite the dangers and our differences, in the impossible world we shared. The first few months of Marco's life were full of contradictions I could not have predicted. There were moments of perfect family happiness mixed with harsh reminders of our reality. It was a world most people only see in movies. I would be in the nursery at 3 in the morning, feeding our son. I would watch the sunrise over our secure property and feel like the most normal new mother in the world. Then I would see the armed guard on patrol outside the window. I would remember that normal was never really an option for us. Adrian meant what he said about protection. He was restructuring his entire life to keep us safe. The proof of his commitment was everywhere. The house he chose for us was in Westchester. It was far from the city, so it felt almost suburban, but it was close enough for him to attend meetings when he had to. The house was beautiful, but not flashy. It was not the huge mansion I might have expected. It was a renovated colonial with a solid structure and tall windows that filled the rooms with light. It had enough land that the security systems did not make us feel like we were in a prison. He had asked for my opinion on every detail of the inside. He learned what I liked with the same focus he used for everything else. The result was a home that felt like it was truly mine, not just another place he controlled. But the security was always there, and sometimes it felt like too much. Cameras covered every inch of the property. Motion sensors were in the woods around us. There was a panic room even better than the one in the apartment. A team of guards worked in shifts around the clock. Maria was now our head of security. I had grown to trust her completely. But there were times I hated that we needed her at all. I wanted to take my baby for a walk without planning it with armed guards. I did not want to discuss routes and timing and possible dangers. Adrian was also going through his own difficult change. I could see how much it exhausted him, even though he tried to hide it from me. He kept his word and stepped back from the most violent parts of his business. He gave power to men he had been training for years. He focused on legal businesses that had no connection to organized crime. But leaving that world was not a simple decision. He had to manage expectations. He had to be careful with his allies so they did not feel abandoned or weak. He constantly had to prove that his lower profile did not mean he could be challenged. I would watch him take calls at strange hours. His voice would become that cold, commanding tone that sometimes still made me shiver. He gave orders about things he never discussed with me. He would leave for meetings that lasted for hours. He would come home with tension in his shoulders and exhaustion in his eyes. I learned not to ask many questions about where he went or what he did. It was not that he was trying to hide things from me. We had agreed early on that I did not want to know details that would keep me up at night. We had an unspoken rule about the line between his business and our family. What surprised me most was how easily he became a father. The same focus that made him a dangerous man in his business made him a devoted father to our son. He was part of every detail of Marco's care. He broke every stereotype I had about powerful men and fatherhood. He learned to change diapers with the same care he probably used to plan a mission. He studied baby development charts like they were secret reports. He got up for night feedings without a single complaint, even with important meetings the next day. I would find him in the nursery at odd times, just watching Marco sleep. His face was soft in a way I never saw when he thought I was not looking. Seeing him so vulnerable with our son was almost harder than seeing his professional cruelty. He was terrified of making a mistake, of hurting this perfect little person we had made. That fear made him doubt himself. This was new for a man who usually made decisions with total confidence. He was always asking me if he was holding Marco the right way. He would ask if he was feeding him correctly or if the baby seemed unhappy. He worried Marco needed something that Adrian did not know how to give him. And when Marco would wrap his tiny hand around Adrian's finger or fall asleep on his chest, I would watch this feared man completely melt. The emotion was so pure it made my own heart ache. We were learning how to be partners, not just parents. It was harder than I had expected. We came from completely different worlds. We had different life experiences and different ideas. Even simple choices could turn into difficult talks. I wanted Marco to have a normal childhood. I wanted playdates, public parks, and a regular school. Adrian's first thought was to keep him safe and isolated, with private tutors and approved friends. I thought Marco should learn to be independent over time. Adrian hated the idea of our son being anywhere we could not see him, or out of reach of our security. We would argue about these things late at night after Marco was sleeping. We were both so sure we knew what was best for our son. But we also learned to meet in the middle. We found a balance between my desire for a normal life and his need for safety. Adrian agreed to let Marco experience the world outside our home, as long as we took the right precautions, and I admitted that some security was needed, and that Adrian was not just being paranoid. We talked about our own childhoods. We talked about what we missed and what we wanted to give our son. Those conversations helped us understand each other on a much deeper level. I started to understand that Adrian's control was born from a deep-seated fear. He was terrified of losing us like he lost his mother. He feared he could not protect the people who meant everything to him. He worried one error could destroy everything he had finally let himself love. My own connection with Adrian was changing in ways that excited and frightened me. We admitted our feelings for one another in that hospital room, but building a romance while learning to be parents together was not simple. We shared a house and a child, but we had not talked about marriage. We had no formal bond beyond our shared love for Marco. Adrian gave me the main bedroom and took a guest room, giving me the space I needed. I could feel his frustration with the setup sometimes. The tension between us was always there, and it was growing stronger. He would walk past me in the hall, and a jolt of energy would course through my body. I would see him holding our son and want to be held in those same strong arms. Sometimes he would look at me with such open longing that I had to turn away to stop myself from doing something reckless. But we were both cautious, afraid to jump into something before we built the trust we needed. Things changed about 4 months after Marco was born. My doctor had approved my return to normal life, but exhaustion from being a new mother made that feel impossible. Adrian had been gone for a 2-day trip to the city for business he could not postpone. When he came back late on a Saturday night, I was in the living room. I was too tired to sleep. He saw me on the sofa with a book I was not reading. The way he looked at me stole my breath. "I missed you," he said, his voice simple and honest. Those 3 words broke something open inside my chest. Not just Marco, though I missed him too, of course. But you, Natalie. I missed talking with you, hearing you laugh, just being near you. These past 2 days were like torture. I put my book down. My heart was racing. "I missed you too," I confessed. "The house feels so quiet when you are not here. Marco kept looking for you, and I kept wanting to tell you things or ask what you thought." I stopped, unsure how to explain the feeling. He walked across the room slowly, giving me a chance to refuse. When I did not move away, he sat next to me on the couch. I could feel the warmth from his body. "I have been trying to give you room," he said softly. "I did not want to push you before you were ready, but I need you to know how I feel about you. It is not about Marco or duty or being thankful. I am completely in love with you, Natalie. I love how you are with our son, your resilience, and your stubbornness when you think I am being overprotective. You have adapted to this insane life and are still yourself. Everything about you makes me fall deeper." I lifted my hand to his face. I traced the strong line of his jaw and the small scar over his eyebrow. "I am scared," I whispered. "Scared of how much I feel for you. Scared of your life. Scared something will happen and I will lose all of this." "I am scared too," he confessed. The vulnerability in his eyes was almost painful. "I am terrified I will fail you, that I cannot keep you safe. I am afraid you will wake up one day and realize you made a huge mistake by choosing someone like me. But I am more scared of not even trying. I cannot live in the same house with you and pretend this is just about parenting. It is so much more." I kissed him. I finally closed the space we had kept between us for months. It felt like coming home and leaping from a cliff all at once. He kissed me back with a passion he had clearly held back for a long time. His hands cupped my face, and the kiss grew deeper until I was breathless. I was completely lost in the feeling of finally letting myself have this. We did not go to bed that night. We both knew Marco was sleeping upstairs. We were determined to take things slowly, no matter how strong our feelings were. We spent the whole night on that couch, talking and kissing. We made promises about the future we would create together. He asked me to marry him, not for the baby or for convenience. He asked because he loved me and wanted to share his life with me. I said yes. I knew it meant accepting his world, with all its dangers. But a life without him was something I could not imagine. We kept the engagement quiet at first, telling only our closest friends. Adrian gave me a beautiful but simple ring. It was a single perfect diamond that reminded me of the night everything began. We planned a small wedding for the summer. It would be in our garden with only family and trusted friends, where security could be controlled. We wanted to celebrate without worrying about attention or threats. But planning a wedding with a baby while managing Adrian's business changes was chaotic. Sometimes I thought we should just run away and get married at City Hall. Maria and one of Adrian's men could be our witnesses, but Adrian wanted to give me a special day. He wanted our son to see us make our official commitment. His desire to make it perfect was sweet, but sometimes overwhelming. The threats did not vanish completely. They just changed. Adrian's rivals saw that direct violence would be met with overwhelming force. So instead of attacks, they tried new tactics. They tried to get information on our security. They looked for weaknesses in Adrian's new companies. They started rumors to harm his reputation with the families he needed as allies. Adrian dealt with every problem with his usual cold focus. But I saw the strain it put on him. He worried all the time about whether he was doing enough to keep us safe. Some nights I would wake up in a cold sweat, sure I had heard a noise. I would find Adrian already awake, his gun nearby, even with guards all over the property. There were still days I hated the limits on our freedom. I wanted to take Marco to a playground without calling armed guards or mapping escape plans. And I still had moments where I could not believe this was my life. I had gone from hiding my pregnancy in fear to raising a family with one of the most dangerous men on the East Coast. But there were also times of pure happiness that made the difficulties fade. Watching Adrian teach Marco how to make funny faces, seeing them giggle together with the same look of joy, finding little love notes Adrian hid for me around the house. They were small proofs that he thought of me during his long days. We had quiet nights after Marco was asleep. We would just sit and talk, building a connection that was deeper than just passion or duty. I graduated that spring. I took classes online during Marco's naps and studied late at night. Adrian was always encouraging me. Walking across that stage to get my diploma was one of my proudest moments. The ceremony had intense security that probably terrified the university staff. Adrian and Marco were there watching me. It was proof that I had not lost myself in the chaos of the past year. I still had my own goals and my own dreams. Adrian kept his promise to move toward legal businesses. But I learned that in his world, legal often operated in a moral gray area. He put money into real estate, new tech companies, and hotels. These businesses all benefited from his skills in managing difficult situations. He kept his ties to his old world, but from a safe distance. He would give advice instead of orders. He was a consultant, not a controller. It was not a total separation. That was likely impossible with his past, but it was a real change he made for us. We were married on a beautiful June day in our garden. Marco, who was 8 months old and incredibly cute, was our ring bearer with Maria's help. The wedding was small, with less than 30 guests, but it felt more genuine than any big event. I wore a simple white dress that made Adrian's eyes darken with desire when he first saw me. He wore a perfectly tailored suit that was a world away from the man I first met. We wrote our own vows. When Adrian promised to protect, cherish, and choose me every day, his voice broke with so much emotion that half our guests started to cry. That night, when the last guest departed and Marco was finally sleeping, the quiet house belonged to us. We were truly husband and wife. It was nothing like that first time. This was measured and meaningful, filled with the weight of our history and our deep commitment. Adrian was devoted, passionate, and entirely in the moment. Later, resting in his arms, in the bedroom that was now ours, I found a deep calm I had never known. This was my life, my family, and my home. It was complicated and dangerous, and not what I had ever dreamed of. But it was mine in the ways that truly mattered. The truth is, I had hidden from Adrian for months. I was terrified of what he would do if he knew about the baby. But him finding me was the greatest thing that ever happened. Not because of his money or his protection, but because being with him, creating this family, showed me that love rarely arrives in a safe, simple package. It can be surrounded by danger and difficult decisions that fill you with fear. You simply have to be brave enough to take it. The person who once scared you the most can become the one you trust without question. And hiding from what is real only postpones what is certain. Love will find you precisely when you need it. It appears even when you are too frightened to see it is there. This story carries a powerful reminder that the people we fear the most are sometimes the ones who would fight the hardest to protect us. Hiding from the truth does not make it disappear. It only delays the moment you have to face it. And sometimes, the bravest thing a woman can do is not run, but stand still and let someone prove they are worthy of her trust. If this story touched your heart, do not leave without hitting that like button and sharing it with someone who needs to hear this message today. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have told him the truth, or would you have kept running? And if you have not subscribed yet, join this family now so you never miss another story like this one. This content was researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful lessons and inspiration to our audience.